So today we're going to continue into section 5.3. So we'll just say here 5.3 day 2. And this is just going to continue what we did on Monday with solving equations. So we've only got 2 examples today. And the first example we're going to look at looks like this. 2 sine squared x minus sine x minus 1 equals 0. And we're going to solve this just again over that interval of 0 to 2 pi. Now, what I want you to notice with this is this sure looks an awful lot like 2x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0 from Algebra 1. And we know how to solve something like that. Something like that we would solve with Ma method or guess and check. In fact, we can do that real quick here and just say, well, it's going to factor into a 2x and an x, and then we would need a minus 1 and a plus 1, and then we'd go ahead and set both of those things equal to 0 and solve them. So we know how to solve that. Well, truth of the matter is, this equation is the exact same as 2x squared minus x minus 1. It's just instead of x, I have sine x. So this will factor with guess and check. What's going to multiply together to give me 2 sine squared? Well, that's going to be a 2 sine x times a sine of x. 2 sine x times sine x is 2 sine squared. I'm going to have a 1 here and a 1 here to get the 1 on the end, and then in order for this to work, that's going to have to be minus and that's going to have to be plus. So I factor this the exact same way. Ma method, guess and check, however you're used to factoring. If you need to rewrite it like that to factor it, then do that. You can see that I have the same thing here. I had 2x plus 1. I have 2 sine x plus 1. I had x minus 1. I have sine x minus 1. So now to finish this, I set both of those equal to 0. 2 sine x plus 1 equals 0. Sine x minus 1 equal to 0, and I solve them both. So now to get sine by itself, this is what we did on Monday. Sine of x is going to equal negative 1/2. Over here, get sine of x by itself. Sine x is equal to 1. So therefore, now to get rid of sine, x will equal the inverse sine of negative 1/2, and x will equal the inverse sine of 1, and then that's where you go to your trig table and say, okay, where does sine equal negative 1/2? And sine's going to equal negative 1/2 at 7 pi over 6 and at 11 pi over 6. And then over here you say, where does sine equal 1? And that is only going to happen at pi over 2. So those are your answers for this equation. So now we're just going to be doing more factoring stuff in order to solve. So let's try one more. So for question number 2, we're going to look at, well, what happens if it's 2 sine squared x plus 3 cosine minus 3 equals 0. Now here's the difference. This would be like in Algebra 1 trying to solve 2x squared plus 3y minus 3. And you can't do that because these variables are different. But luckily when I use trig, I have the ability to change variables into other things using the identities. So if you focus on sine squared, I know that I can replace sine squared with 1 minus cosine squared of x. That's a Pythagorean trig identity. I'm going to keep everything else the same. Plus 3 cosine minus 3 equals 0. So all of that's going to stay. Now if I distribute 2 minus 2 cosine squared plus 3 cosine minus 3 equals 0. I can see that I got them all to the same variable. I can combine some terms. Negative 2 cosine squared plus 3 cosine minus 1 equals 0. And now this is something that I can factor, either with the mom method or guess and check. Now, before I do that, I don't like this first term being negative, so I'm going to switch all the signs. 2 cosine squared minus 3 cosine plus 1 equals 0. And now it's just like the last question that we did. So let's get that factored. 2 cosine times cosine is going to have to go in there. And then I'm going to need a minus 1 and a minus 1 to make that work. So then I have 2 cosine of x minus 1 equals 0, and I have cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. So if I solve, I get cosine of x equals 1/2, and I get the cosine of x equals 1. So now you're ready to go to your trig table and find where does cosine equal 1/2, and that's going to happen at pi over 3 and at 5 pi over 3. And then you're going to say, where does cosine equal 1? And that happens at 0 and again at 2 pi. So that would be your set of answers for these. So on the few problems that I'm giving you for tonight's homework, I want you to be thinking about factoring and look at my work and my answer key if you need to for help.